Good morning. I want to welcome everyone to the Strategic Forces Subcommittee's hearing on sustaining GPS for national security. I was planning to make the usual statement of appreciation to the witnesses for their appearance here today, and to those witnesses who took this issue seriously enough to be here, General Shelton, Ms. Takai, Mr. Nebbia, Mr. Russo, and Mr. Knapp. I do want to thank you for taking the time to be here and your testimony. That said, I have the unfortunate responsibility to inform the subcommittee that the Federal Communications Chairman, Jankowski, refused to appear today. I must also make clear that I consider the Chairman's failure to show up today to be an affront to the House Armed Services Committee. Further, it appears to be symptomatic of a disregard by the Chairman to the consequences of the FCC's January 26th waiver to Light Squared. Now, we've heard that perhaps even the Chairman was even in this very building today. We'd like to know that from the Chairman, whether or not he even came so close to this hearing as to be in this building and still not appear. At no time did the Chairman offer an alternative time to appear. We're unaware of any issue of this being merely a scheduling conflict. And the Chairman did say that he was concerned about it prejudicing the process about what he might say here in the hearing. Personally, I believe this is an absolute effort by the Chairman to avoid the oversight questions by Congress, to avoid the responsibility of the issue of how this will affect GPS, and what the FCC's processes appear to be irregular as to how this matter is moving forward. So I'm very concerned that the Chairman has not appeared and has not given us really a very good understanding or a very good reasoning as to why he's not answering these questions. Now, I do appreciate that the Chairman is apparently willing to provide personal responses to written questions to the record submitted by the subcommittee according to staff. But the Chairman's priority should be the same as the subcommittee's: sustaining GPS for national security. Now, we all understand the difference between written questions and in-person testimony. You don't have an ability to ask a follow-on question. No one else gets to hear the aspect of his question, to have them follow a different take. This is, I think, makes the ability of this subcommittee to get to the bottom of these issues and to more importantly, advance the issue of sustaining GPS for national security more difficult. Now, with that out of the way, I wish to introduce and express my appreciation to the witnesses who are here. General William Shelton, Commander of the Air Force Space Command. I note this is General Shelton's second appearance before this subcommittee in as many weeks. Either the General really likes us or he's working to accommodate us on a very strong basis. Ms. Takai, Chief Information Officer for the Department of Defense. Mr. Nebbia, Associate Administrator, Office of Spectrum Management, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and Mr. Anthony Russo, National Coordination Office, Space-Based Positioning, Navigation and Training, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Mr. Julius Knapp, Chief of the Federal Communications Office of Engineering Technology. Ms. Knapp, I want to thank you for being here today, and I want it to be clear that neither I nor my colleagues have anything other than gratitude for your service. Our concerns are with the Chairman's lack of appearance, and we certainly appreciate the information that you're going to provide us today, but we do believe that the Chairman has additional questions that he needs to be answering. I want to thank all of you for being here. Now, why are we here this morning? General Shelton, you might remember this question. It was asked by a member of the subcommittee during the classified briefing you provided all of us last week on Light Squared GPS test results. A brief recap and that question is why are we here? I mean, to some extent, this issue seems relatively clear, and yet we're still facing a process that is moving forward, and so that's why we're having this hearing today, which is to try to get some light on the issue of Light Squared and GPS. A brief recap of how we got here to the point of this hearing. On January 26th of this year, the FCC granted a conditional waiver of its own rules, allowing Light Squared to establish a terrestrial broadband network and be freed of certain gating requirements, which were designed to keep any potential terrestrial surface from overwhelming the satellite spectrum that Light Squared held. As we now know, this network would operate with over 40,000 base stations operating at a frequency adjacent to that long used by Global Position System known as GPS, at almost 5 billion times the power of the GPS system. The chairman of the FCC knew that there were concerns about the proposed waiver for Light Squared as he received a letter from Deputy Secretary of Defense Bill Lynn on January 12th, 2 weeks before the waiver was issued. The Deputy Secretary wrote to Mr. Janikowski that, quote, there is strong potential for interference to these critical national security space systems, close quote, referring to GPS. This letter also asked that the chairman pay personal attention to this matter. Without objection, this letter will be made part of the record of this hearing. We also know that the National Telecommunications Information Administration Assistant Secretary Lawrence Strickling wrote to Chairman Janikowski recommending that the FCC not go forward with the Light Squared waiver request. Many have observed that the FCC followed an irregular process on the Light Squared waiver. First, the National Legal and Policy Center stated in a February 2nd, 2011 letter to the chairman and ranking member of the House Government and Oversight and Reform Committee that, quote, over the course of the past year, a series of odd decisions, questionable meetings, and procedural anomalies at the Federal Communications Commission and White House highlight Mr. Falcone's growing influence in the hallways of government. Mr. Falcone is the CEO of the hedge fund Harbinger Capital Partners, which owns Light Squared. Without objection, this letter will be made a part of the record. Additionally, in a March letter to Chairman Janikowski, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, joined by the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, noted that, quote, the DoD and DOT were not sufficiently included in the development of the Light Squared Initial Work Plan and its key milestones. This letter again sought the FCC Chairman's personal attention. Without objection, this letter will also be made a part of our record. And just yesterday, the Center for Policy Integrity released a report detailing, and I quote, emails show wireless firms' communications with White House as campaign donations were made, close quote. In my capacity as a member of the House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight, I will be asking Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Towns to promptly investigate this matter. We cannot afford to have federal telecommunications policy, especially where it affects national security, to be made in the same way that the White House has parceled out $500 million in loan guarantees to the failed Shalandra Corporation, a large political campaign contributor of the president. While there is clearly concern about how the FCC has conducted this process, those concerns are within the purview of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Also, aside from the scope of today's hearing, but of significance and concern nonetheless, is the impact to GPS receiver manufacturers like Trimble Navigation in my hometown of Dayton, Ohio, which manufactures GPS receivers for the agricultural sector and heavy machinery producers like Caterpillar. But this subcommittee's main purview is national security, and the national security consequences of the Light Squared network are significant. As I mentioned, the concern in this case is that Light Squared's proposed network of 40,000 base stations around the U.S., which broadcast at an adjacent signal frequency to that used by the GPS system, but at 5 billion times the signal strength, will render or may render useless the DoD's GPS receivers. I think General Shelton will be telling us today that it does. General Shelton, commander of the Air Force Space Command, informed the House Strategic Forces Subcommittee members in last week's briefing that, quote, tests show Light Squared signal causes significant interference to military GPS. Simply put, if the FCC gives Light Squared the final go-ahead to build out this network, I fear that the DoD's training activities in the United States may come to an end. This cannot be allowed to happen. As the members of the House Armed Services Committee know, before U.S. troops are deployed, they conduct extensive real-world training, which includes the use of GPS for orientating U.S. forces, locating friendly forces, and locating enemy forces, conducting search and rescue activities, targeting of precision-guided ordnance, and calling in close air support. None of these activities are possible without DoD's high-precision GPS receivers, which would be most affected by the Light Squared network. As a member of Congress, I can think of no higher responsibility than making sure our U.S. military forces are fully trained and equipped before they are deployed overseas to Afghanistan, Iraq, or any place in harm's way. Likewise, and this is something in all of our minds close to the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks on the United States, significant harmful interference to the GPS system would be a tremendous liability to our defense of our homeland. General Shelton, I recall you making this point, and I look forward to your comments on that today. The Armed Services Committee's position, as articulated by the Turner-Sanchez Amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act of FY 2012, is that the Federal Communications Commission should not grant LightSquared final approval of the conditional waiver granted to the company on January 26, 2011, until the Commission has dealt with potential harmful interference to the DoD's GPS receivers. LightSquared itself has no apparent objection to this provision. LightSquared has been making a vigorous case for its $4 billion investment in its proposed network build-out of a new nationwide broadband service. That is a bipartisan policy objective to encourage more nationwide broadband service, and more competition as a policy is not in dispute, at least not before this committee. The question for the subcommittee today is how to evaluate the harm identified by the Department of Defense to its $34 billion investment in GPS ground stations, and DoD high-precision military GPS receivers. Again, it is more important than how much this cost, the issue of what is the effect upon the warfighters who rely on this technology for safety and their technological edge against adversity. And let me state that harm to GPS, once again very clearly, quote, tests show LightSquared signal causes significant interference to military GPS, close quote. As my colleagues know by now, on Tuesday of this week, the FCC apparently came to the same conclusion and issued a public notice that, quote, potential for harmful interference meant that additional targeted testing is needed, close quote. I consider that this to be the understatement of the decade. But we need to know what this public notice actually means for DoD GPS users. This may very well be an effort to push matters off merely a few months under the assumption that Congress will be distracted. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses to get to the bottom of this matter. Now, with that, let me turn to my ranking member, Ms. Sanchez, who's done some excellent work on this topic and has been a great defender of our GPS system for the Department of Defense.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here before us. I'm not really concerned, Mr. Chairman, about Chairman Janikowski not being before our committee today. I think that you and I had a very good meeting with him last week, and he stated some of the reasons why he really didn't want to be before our committee today, if you will. And he also sent a letter, I know, to you, which I would like to put into the record so that everybody can see what the chairman of the FCC has said with respect to this issue at this point. I would like to say that it seems to me that this is really a fight brewing out there between commerce, if you will, and the civilian issues that we face every day with respect to communicating between people in particular and information sharing, etc., and our military security. And if that's the case, if this is going to be sort of a battle between commerce and our national security, I think that you and I would agree, Mr. Chairman, that I think national security is going to, be on the top layer for not only us and not only the Congress, but for Americans if they are faced with that one or the other solution. So what I think this process is about is to see if there is an accommodation that allows our commercial aspects to move forward in order to make our country as competitive as it can be, and yet at the same time continue to allow us the type of national security that we all have worked so hard towards. And those types of pushes and those types of fights, if you will, are really what this Congress is about, and it's really about policy issues, and really it's about Americans and what they decide that they want. And that's why it's important that we have these types of hearings and that we have things pretty out in the open as much as we can so that Americans can also see not only the type of work that the Congress does, but what is really at stake. So I do, and I want to take note that in the Congress in particular, there are always these jurisdictional types of issues, Energy and Commerce as a committee, of course, is pushing to see more jobs come forward, to see new technologies come forward, to have communication happen. We on the Military Committee, it's our job to ensure that our national security is at its best. So I look forward to this hearing for that reason, because we have heard from a lot of sides. There are a lot of people walking the halls of Congress trying to speak to these issues. GPS assets, I want to say, are critical to our national security and to our way of life. And so I actually support the increase in the improvement of broadband service. But not at the expense of national security. So I just want people to know that. Again, I don't know that it's one or the other. There might be accommodations. But here's the issue. The issue is that we are in a time of limited budgets, and that we have a deep investment by our military and by our taxpayers with respect to the programs that we already have, to the devices that we have. And so anybody trying to do something from a commercial aspect will have to show us that it doesn't affect our national security, and that if there is mitigation to be done, that should not necessarily fall on the taxpayer. But then again, that's what public policy is about. That's what votes are about. That's what elections are about. And as we move forward, I would like to say, Mr. Turner, you and I have worked very well on this committee, and I don't think that we need to point fingers or politicize or really call into question people's intent or what their motives are. I hope that's not the case in some of the harsher language that I heard right now in your opening statement. You know, I want to do the right things, and members of Congress want to do the right things. I hope that this hearing will give us a better understanding for several key issues. I also want to say another thing before I get into the specifics of this. A lot of questions are being placed on whose intent, whose motivation, etc., including to our military men and women. You know? And I think it's right to question, but I do not want to see anybody smeared in this about what their motives or intents are, especially not our military people. So I just want to say that to our general sitting there. I think it's important to have this discussion. This hearing, I hope, will provide us the opportunity to better understand key issues that we need to understand in making decisions. First of all, the risk and the impacts that LightSquared's proposed terrestrial 4G network plan and how that interference will affect our weapon systems. The level to which our military depends on GPS assets, whether the interference can be mitigated, and whether the fixes would require recertification of our weapons programs, what the impact is to the mission, and what those costs would be. It bears noting, and I think the Chairman put that forward, that our investment from the taxpayer standpoint is almost $35 billion. And if there's to be further testing, what that would look like and what the timelines would be for something like this. What the FCC's process is for deciding whether to allow implementation of LightSquared's proposal, and what consultations are ongoing with other agencies, and whether those agencies and their consultation, if that's being taken seriously by the FCC. I think that's an important point, because, you know, some would think that it's that they're not listening. How the interagency process will ensure that our national security issues are considered and resolved satisfactorily. I think those are the important issues, and I look forward to this. And again, I am glad that it is out in the open, so that we can do away with whose intent and who's a winner and loser, and really focus on our national security and our communication for the future for America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll submit my testimony, my written testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Without objection, the letter you referenced will be made part of the record, though I do believe that it is non-responsive and ambiguous in many key respects to the questions that we had asked. I will be submitting additional questions to Chairman Janikowski that he has indicated that he will accept personally. As we're turning to our witnesses, I just want to reiterate the central purpose for this hearing. We currently are in a situation where DoD says that Light Squared, their system, affects GPS and our national security. We are looking at this information in light of the fact that the FCC has already in part proceeded with Light Squared in a manner which would affect our national security. And we still understand that there's a process going forward with the FCC that ultimately this could go forward. So we are in the context of understanding its effects on national security, and I think the understanding, and I'm looking forward to General Shelton's testimony, of the clarity that this is not ambiguous, that this affects national security and affects our GPS. With that, General Shelton.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sanchez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's an honor to appear before you today alongside these other witnesses as the Commander of Air Force Space Command. Our command is the DoD lead for the Global Positioning System constellation of satellites responsible for developing, building, launching, and operating GPS to deliver precision, positioning, navigation, and timing services to billions of military, civil, and commercial users. Although GPS is a military-procured and operated satellite constellation, it is recognized as a global utility serving users around the globe. In fact, its use is so ubiquitous here at home, I would put GPS in the category of critical infrastructure for the United States. And for our military, GPS has become an essential capability for a host of applications in joint operations. Today, I appear before at the subcommittee's request to discuss the testing conducted thus far for the proposed Light Squared terrestrial broadband network. The test we conducted in concert with the FAA was robust, with over 100 receivers from 24 different organizations, and it spanned the military, government, aviation, precision agriculture, automotive, and general use communities. It is important to note that the testing was conducted using an actual Light Squared transmitter, broadcast filters, and antennas, which would be used in their network. In addition to providing their equipment and setting it up to ensure an accurate test, Light Squared personnel reviewed our test plan to ensure it was consistent with their originally planned network deployment. The test results showed Light Squared signals operating according to their originally filed deployment plan interfere with every type of receiver in the test. These results were compiled in a report submitted through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration to the FCC on July 6th of this year. Light Squared has since proposed an alternative deployment plan which involves lower power broadcasts and the use of only the lower 10 megahertz of their assigned frequencies. We conducted only limited testing on broadcasts in the lower 10 alone, but precision receivers and even some cell phones were still affected. Further testing would be required to fully characterize the potential interference with this lower 10 plan. As we move forward under NTIA's direction in evaluating the latest Light Squared proposal, Air Force Space Command remains open to ideas on mitigation strategies, but we must ensure we continue to lead the world in PNT services and reliably support our users worldwide. In summary, based on the test results and analysis to date, the Light Squared network would effectively jam vital GPS receivers, and to our knowledge thus far, there are no mitigation options that would be effective in eliminating interference to essential GPS services in the United States. I thank the committee for your continued support of Air Force Space Command and the capabilities we provide this nation. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Takai.
Good morning, Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Sanchez, and distinguished subcommittee members. And thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the importance of GPS to our national defense capabilities. My testimony today will focus on the importance of GPS reliability to the Department of Defense in ensuring that our warfighters and allies have the critical positioning, navigation, and timing, or PNT capabilities that they required. As General Shelton said, we believe the GPS stands as the cornerstone of the DoD PNT capability and is integrated into almost every aspect of our U.S. military operations. To give you but a few examples, GPS signals are used to ensure the accuracy of precision-guided munitions, to guide troop movements, to synchronize communication networks, and to enable battle-space situational awareness, and to conduct search and rescue missions. DoD is committed to sustaining and modernizing GPS to maintain and improve our military PNT capabilities. Several GPS innovations are scheduled during the next 10-plus years, including 3 new civil signals, enhanced encrypted military signals, and a new constellation operational control segment, which are scheduled to come online by 2018 and then be implemented system-wide into the GPS receiver populations over the successive 5 or more years. As DoD's Chief Information Officer, I have the collateral duty as the co-chair of the Executive Steering Group of the National Executive Committee for Space-Based PNT, along with my counterpart from the Department of Transportation. The role of that EXCOM is to advise departments, agencies, and the Executive Office of the President regarding strategic policies, requirements, and security of all PNT infrastructures, including GPS. In response to the January 2011 Federal Communications Order that conditionally allowed LightSquared to unbundle their ancillary terrestrial component restriction in the mobile satellite services band adjacent to GPS, the PNT EXCOM tasked the National Space-Based PNT Engineering Forum, or the NPEF, to perform testing to ascertain the potential interference. As General Shelton mentioned, that testing was performed at White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. That report was completed on June 15th of 2011 and then submitted to NTIA for their review and transmitted to the FCC. The test data indicated that proposed LightSquared terrestrial operations would cause harmful interference to GPS operations. GPS receivers of various types and manufacture, operated not just by DoD, but by the U.S. Coast Guard, the Federal Aviation Administration, the State of New Mexico Public Safety, commercial aviation, and precision farming systems showed varying degrees of degradation of GPS accuracy, interruptions of GPS signal acquisition, or total loss of GPS tracking and position. None of the parties cognizant of the NPEF testing dispute that the LightSquared terrestrial network plan that was tested by NPEF caused unacceptable levels of harmful interference to GPS. The testing also showed a source of interference that was due to the combined effect of the LightSquared dual-channel signal. This intermodulation product was generated on top of the GPS L1 signal in its GPS band, interfering with GPS receivers. This IMP was caused by the LightSquared dual-channel choice and its design, and not by the designs or filtering limitations of the GPS receivers. Subsequently, LightSquared and the GPS industry filed their technical working group report. That report also does not contest the NPEF results, nor does it offer a mitigation solution of the IMP interference. Instead, as has been mentioned, LightSquared proposed to the FCC the recommendation of an alternative terrestrial network that was not in the test plans of either the NPEF or TWG tests and was not tested to any extent comparable to the dual-channel tests. LightSquared's modified proposal recommends launching commercial services initially in only their lower 10 megahertz. DoD at this time has not received a sufficiently clear and complete description of a LightSquared lower 10 megahertz deployment plan to professionally analyze its new aggregate interference environment. In addition, we are evaluating the effects of LightSquared's terrestrial transmissions on the military's use of the Inmarsat satellite systems for data and voice communications. The LightSquared's terrestrial system will interfere with DoD usage of Inmarsat if appropriate mitigation actions are not taken. We are diligently working with Inmarsat to identify mitigating techniques for reducing the potential interference for military, land, maritime, and aeronautical missions and communication requirements. The Department will continue to work with its administration partners and NTIA, as well as with Congress, to address long-term solutions regarding the balance between federal spectrum requirements and the expanding demand for mobile broadband services. We look forward to working with the FCC, NTIA, and LightSquared to ensure that all further proposed mitigations or alternatives for the light-square terrestrial network are thoroughly tested to ensure no harmful interference to GPS receivers or other military spectrum requirements. The ability of GPS to operate without harmful interference remains of paramount importance to the Department. Thank you for your interest in the Department's efforts in this area, and would be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Nebbia.
Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Sanchez, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the President's principal advisor on telecommunications and information policy and manager of federal use of the radio spectrum. As Associate Administrator for the Office of Spectrum Management, I oversee this critical spectrum function. I am pleased to discuss NTIA's efforts to ensure that critical uses of GPS continue without interference. In November of last year, LightSquared proposed to modify its authorization for a mobile satellite service auxiliary terrestrial component previously understood to be a satellite service gap filler. This proposal requested authorization to deploy on a wholesale basis a nationwide terrestrial network with handsets that do not connect to the satellite system. These operations would occur in 2 spectrum bands on either side of the GPS range, with 2 signals within each of these 2 bands. This proposal represented the potential for increased mobile broadband capacity and choice for all Americans. However, LightSquared's proposal generated concern from the GPS community that the network would cause interference to GPS receivers. These concerns did not arise from LightSquared's emissions spilling into the GPS band, but from the fact that some GPS receivers would not adequately filter LightSquared signals outside of the GPS band. Also, some other GPS receivers, including precision receivers, improve their accuracy by extending into the MSS band. On January 12th, NTIA advised the FCC that the federal agency concerns warranted a full evaluation. On the 26th of January, the Commission granted LightSquared a waiver conditioned on consultation with NTIA and the resolution of GPS interference concerns. Between January and June, a technical working group co-chaired by LightSquared and the GPS Industry Council, NASA via the Jet Propulsion Lab, RTCA on behalf of aviation interests, and the Executive Committee for Space-Based Position, Navigation, and Timing, the XCOM, all conducted tests of GPS devices in the presence of LightSquared signals. These tests were based on LightSquared's original plan to transmit 2 separate 10 megahertz base station signals within the band just below GPS. On July 6th, NTIA submitted the results of the XCOM tests showing that LightSquared's proposed operations would cause interference to both government and commercial GPS uses. NTIA recommended that the FCC continue to withhold authorization to commence commercial operations. The report of the technical working group reached similar conclusions. As a result, LightSquared proposed to modify its plan and use only the lower 10 megahertz channel. This change came too late for full testing and evaluation by federal agencies and raised concern about applying critical resources to an evolving proposal. NTIA and the federal agencies have been reviewing the test data to determine whether the use of the lower 10 megahertz would eliminate interference to general navigation and cellular GPS receivers, and whether additional testing and analyses are needed. Everyone agrees that some timing and precision devices will receive interference even if LightSquared uses only the lower 10 megahertz. Therefore, for those applications, some other mitigation technique will have to be developed and tested. Last week, NTIA requested that the XCOM work with LightSquared to develop a test plan to study by November 30th remaining concerns for general navigation and cellular receivers, and we have provided that document as an exhibit within our testimony. Meanwhile, Light Squared is pursuing the design and manufacture of a filter to mitigate impacts to precision receivers. With respect to timing receivers, Light Squared has identified an antenna with filter characteristics that may provide a possible solution. Light Squared has agreed that it will not commence commercial operations until the federal agencies test these techniques and conclude that they prevent interference without degrading the performance of the receivers. The administration intends to protect critical and national security relevant GPS services. Due to the need for additional spectrum for mobile broadband, we will try to resolve these interference issues to maximize use of the band. We will, in coordination with the FCC, work to complete the required testing or analysis and determine what strategies can provide workable solutions. We await Light Squared's delivery of a filter for the high-precision receivers and will seek prompt agency testing and analysis of that solution when it arrives. Light Squared has submitted a new proposal to the Commission seeking to protect GPS operations based on an agreed signal level on the ground. We will also review this approach as we move forward. In coordination with the federal agencies, we will provide thorough and expert input to this dialogue so that the American public can extract the greatest possible benefit from the radio spectrum. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I'm pleased to take your questions.
Mr. Russo.
Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Sanchez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you. The global positioning system has grown into a worldwide utility whose multi-use services are integral to our national and homeland security. Services dependent on GPS information are now an engine for economic growth and improve both the safety and the quality of life. The system is essential to first responders and a key component to multiple critical infrastructure sectors. Since 1983, the United States has had a multi-use policy in place for GPS. This policy has had strong bipartisan support, and each successive administration has strengthened the interagency participation in the program. In 2004, President Bush issued a policy establishing a Deputy Secretary-level Executive Committee, or EXCOM, to advise and coordinate on GPS issues. Last year, President Obama signed a comprehensive national space policy which left this EXCOM structure in place but added emphasis and additional guidance in 4 key areas related to GPS and specifically addressed the issue of GPS interference. This policy also directs the identification of impacts to government space systems prior to any reallocation of spectrum for commercial, federal, or shared use. To execute the staff functions of the EXCOM and to assist them in ensuring implementation of the President's policy objectives, a national coordination office was established with representatives from every department or agency with major equities in GPS. I'm the director of this interagency office. On the 26th of January this year, the FCC approved a conditional waiver for Light Squared's high-powered broadband network that the Executive Committee had warned might cause significant interference to GPS applications. And with the permission of the Executive Committee, I tasked an interagency working group called the MPEF to conduct modeling, simulation, analysis, bench testing, chamber testing, and live sky testing to evaluate the effects of Light Squared's transmissions on GPS receivers. The group was co-chaired by leaders in FAA and the Air Force, but with supporting technical representatives from across the interagency. And despite the numerous limitations and constraints that I've listed for you in my written testimony, the MPEF was able to complete the job they were asked to do. They evaluated a wide range of representative receivers against all 3 phases of Light Squared's proposed deployment. The answer is definitive. Light Squared's proposed system will create harmful interference. The MPEF could not identify any feasible option that would mitigate harmful interference for all or even most GPS users and still allow Light Squared to meet their system requirements. Now, when the FCC granted the conditional waiver, they directed the creation of a Light Squared-led working group to conduct tests and resolve the interference concerns that the EXCOM had raised. The FCC highly encouraged participation from the government, so 10 of our best technical experts from across the interagency participated in this technical working group, or TWG, along with strong representation from across the diverse GPS industry. The test results collected and analyzed by this TWG were consistent with the results of the government MPEF tests. On June 29th, Light Squared submitted their TWG report acknowledging the harmful interference their system would create. And simultaneously, Light Squared submitted a separate recommendations report outlining a proposed 3-part solution. The Light Squared recommendation report was not reviewed or evaluated by the TWG, and all 10 of the government participants disagree with the assertion it makes about the TWG results. LightSquare's three-part proposal is very constructive and involves both lower authorized power and a rephasing of their deployment so that the channel further from the border of GPS comes first. This would decrease, but not eliminate, the number and extent of initial impacts to GPS devices and allow more time for the development of mitigation methods. This new initial phase was not tested by the government since it wasn't proposed until after we had submitted our results. But yesterday I did receive permission from the Executive Committee to begin a new round of testing focused on this new signal configuration. In LightSquare's new proposal, they offered a standstill for operating their second higher frequency channel, which does impact all classes of GPS receivers. Now, just when they would need to use this second channel was undefined. However, LightSquare testified to Congress they were seeking a glide path to using it within 2 to 3 years. Therefore, any necessary mitigation measures would have to be in place by that time frame. Further study is needed and in progress on the most recent LightSquare proposals, and my office will support these studies. I thank you for this opportunity to speak on this issue of great strategic importance to the nation and to over 1 billion worldwide users of GPS. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Knapp.
Good afternoon, Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Sanchez, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Julius Knapp, and I am Chief of the Federal Communications Commission Office of Engineering and Technology, where I've been an engineer for 37 years. OET is the Commission's primary resource for engineering expertise and provides technical support to the Chairman, Commissioners, and the FCC's bureaus and offices. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Commission concerning the process for working with other agencies to resolve spectrum interference issues and on LightSquared. The FCC has managed America's commercial spectrum since 1934, although our predecessor agencies were operating since 1912. We have nearly 100 years of accumulated experience in governing the airways and ensuring that the services using our nation's valuable spectrum do not cause harmful interference to one another. This work is central, part of our core mission. As you are aware, the FCC and the NTIA share responsibility for managing the radio spectrum. While the FCC is responsible for use of the spectrum by the commercial sector, as well as state and local governments, the NTIA is responsible for use by the federal government, including the Department of Defense. The FCC and NTIA have coordinated use of the spectrum by various services and prevented and resolved harmful interference under a memorandum of understanding that has worked effectively for more than 70 years. My written testimony provides historical background on the development of rules for the ancillary terrestrial component service of the mobile satellite service. There are 2 brief points I'd like to make. First, the provisions for terrestrial service were first adopted in 2003 and affirmed in 2005 in an open rulemaking in which GPS interference issues were considered. Second, an authorization was granted to LightSquared's predecessors in 2004 to offer ancillary terrestrial service in the L-band spectrum adjacent to GPS. The Commission in January 2011 granted LightSquared a conditional waiver of the rule requiring an integrated satellite and terrestrial service. Under this conditional waiver, customers of LightSquared's wholesale mobile satellite and terrestrial service could themselves offer standalone terrestrial service at retail, provided LightSquared itself offers only a fully integrated terrestrial and satellite service. The waiver did not alter any of the provisions governing LightSquared's terrestrial network and continued to require LightSquared to provide a robust satellite service consistent with the launch of its new satellite last November. After LightSquared submitted its request, the GPS industry, the NTIA, and other federal agencies raised strong concerns that LightSquared's base stations operating adjacent to the GPS band would cause overload interference to GPS receivers. This was a new issue that had not come up previously. Accordingly, the conditional waiver stipulated that LightSquared could not provide commercial service until the Commission, in consultation with NTIA and working with the agencies, is satisfied that the concerns about potential for harmful interference to GPS have been resolved. The conditional waiver also directed LightSquared to organize and participate in a GPS interference technical working group in which interested parties could work directly with LightSquared to resolve potential GPS harmful interference concerns. LightSquared filed the final report of the technical working group on June 30th, and the public comment period on that closed on August 15th, although we've continued to meet with all of the parties. Based on the results of the working group's testing, LightSquared submitted its recommendations to address the interference problems. LightSquared, recognizing that the upper portion of its band significantly interfered with GPS receivers, proposed to operate only in the lower portion of its band furthest away from GPS. Earlier this week, the Commission's International Bureau and the Office of Engineering and Technology released a public notice which reflects the Commission's determination, in consultation with the NTIA, that additional targeted testing is needed to ensure that any potential interference to commercial services offered by LightSquared do not cause harmful interference to GPS. In closing, I want to make absolutely clear that, as Chairman Janikowski has said, and I believe it's in his letter as well, the Commission will not authorize LightSquared to begin commercial service if its operation would cause harmful interference to GPS. The Commission and its staff would never take and have never taken an action that would threaten the safety or security of America's citizens. We will continue to work closely with the NTIA, the Department of Defense, and the federal agencies to assess LightSquared's latest proposal and determine the viability of technical solutions that will enable both services to coexist. We'd be certainly happy to keep the committee informed of our progress, and I look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Knapp, I appreciate your statement of that commitment. That's why, of course, we're having this hearing, and we have 4 witnesses before you who said that this system absolutely affects our national security and our GPS upon which we're reliant. And so we're as we've said before, we're certainly looking forward to this being resolved so we can all have that confidence that the FCC will recognize the clear and unambiguous statements of the 4 people that spoke before you. Joel Shelton, you've been just incredible in helping this committee to try to understand this and to come up to speed on it. As we look to GPS, the operations of our military, we look to you, the technical experts, to come and tell us in balancing these issues of technical capabilities. Is there an impact to our national security, and is there an impact to the GPS on which we rely? We appreciate your very clear statements and your dedication in looking at testing and engineering requirements, so that when you have provided us your conclusion, that we can all be confident in it. In your prepared testimony, you state, quote, "Testing showed unacceptable interference to all 33 high-performance receivers, as well as certain military receivers tested in the vicinity of the LightSquared low-band transmitter." Now, in our classified briefing, you provide us with some slides that are unclassified, and I have those here. And I appreciate this representation of showing the interference that is coming from the terrestrial system upon the GPS's frequency. And I ask that this slide be included in the record of today that shows that this encroachment or interference is really the area of where we start to see the problems in the operations for GPS. And then also on slide 11, which comments on the proposal of the lower 10 channel. Your statement on this slide is not acceptable based upon initial test results from both the Engineering Forum and Industry Council reports, and then you say more tests needed. I note in your written testimony you state similarly clearly this affects GPS even at their proposal of the lower 10. So with that, knowing that both in your testimony on this slide there's the statement of additional testing needed, could you please tell us going forward what would be the path for evaluating this option of the lower 10 that's proposed by LightSquared? And from what you've seen so far, is it there, what is your opinion as to whether or not this is at all even a realistic option as you continue to test it? General.
Mr. Chairman, as we looked at that under the previous testing, we saw certainly interference even with the lower 10. The TWG saw the same thing. They saw interference in certain types of receivers, not all, but certain types of receivers. The latest direction from the NTIA, and Mr. Nebbia may want to talk more about this, but the latest direction is to not test the high precision receivers and the timing receivers just yet, because there are some mitigation options that have been proposed, but yet aren't quite yet ready for prime time. That is filters on the high precision receivers and a special antenna on the timing receivers. Now, before you go forward, I want you to finish, so don't lose your thought process there. But now, to clarify the issue of the filters, the filters are something that you would have to do, not that they would have to do, right? I mean, it doesn't go on Light Squared system; it goes on your system. It does. Light Squared has proposed that they could develop these filters, and then you'd have to put this in everything. Absolutely, every precision receiver would have to be retrofitted. How that might affect the overall platform that it's on is an unknown. And concepts of any time that you're modifying these systems, you add the issue of vulnerability to the systems and all type of unintended consequences that we can't be certain of, including the enormous cost that you would be facing. The enormous cost, time, integration testing to thoroughly wring out these filters if they're technically feasible. And even with that, because there's a difference of opinion, technical difference of opinion here, but we believe that the precision of those receivers would be impacted even in the presence of that filter. Without getting too technical here, there's a center frequency, and then there are harmonics off that center frequency. It's those harmonics that go out, among other frequencies, that are important for the precision of those wideband receivers, if you will. Clipping off those harmonics decreases the accuracy of the receiver. If there's something else magic out there, we don't know about it. And that's an interesting point, because certainly you're very aware of the existing engineering, the technology that's there. So to summarize for a moment, what we have here is your unambiguous statement that Light Squared system interferes. The two options that have been proposed, the lower 10 is one that does not ameliorate the interference, and the filters, and both of which at this point seem to be unacceptable options from your testimony. And then I have to ask you a question that is, I think, a little bit amusing, and I'd like your thoughts or reactions. We're going to go a little bit from the technical. As you know, while we were sitting in the classified briefing, one of the members brought with them this giant ad in Politico by Light Squared. And this ad says, "Excuse me, you're in my space." And in this picture, they've got these two guys on a train, and the one guy's leaning over in the other guy's space. I think the guy who's infringing on the space is supposed to be DOD and commercial users. I think they're trying to indicate, General, that this may be you on the train going into Light Squared space. And this, it was odd in the tone of the ad, because, again, it's not that it's an issue of technical clarity. It was an ad of blame. And so I have some questions for you. Light Squared argues that in this ad, they say, quote, "They're causing the problem. They've ignored government standards for 8 years. They're taking advantage of an $18 billion subsidy." General, can I have your thoughts on these allegations? I know you've seen the ad too, and I think it's just very curious, and I just love your response. Okay. Mr. Chairman, the frequency band that we're talking about here has, by FCC rulings in the past, has always been intended to be a quote-unquote quiet neighborhood, that GPS could coexist with other signals of the same magnitude. GPS is a very weak signal coming from space. It's a spread spectrum signal. It takes very special processing by receivers to pull that signal out of the background noise. If you have signals of a similar strength to GPS, that's not a problem for the receiver. However, if you put a rock band in the middle of that very quiet neighborhood, it's a very different sort of circumstance. Does that reach into the spectrum that Light Squared was assigned? Absolutely it does. But that was intentional in the design of the GPS receivers to, again, take those harmonics that stretch out. So to say that the manufacturers aren't adhering to a standard If you look at what we think they're considering to be the standard, that standard is about broadcasts from the satellite, not about receiver design.
Well, I just want to point out also then my interpretation of this graphic picture here, because I think what's happening is not just that it's actually DoD and GPS users that are being pushed away. With light squared system, according to current testing, no one else would be allowed on the bus. So we're not even trying to share space. We're having one completely block out the other. I have additional questions. I know other members do, but I'll turn at this time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again to the witnesses. General, could you elaborate on the impact of redesigning manufacturer testing, integrating, modifying, cost and time on everything that would be affected if there was a technical solution to this, and there was a prototype that actually worked and you were convinced it worked? What would be the timing and the cost, in your opinion, to DoD to fix just our stuff that needs to work, continue to work?
We have not estimated cost. However, I think it'd be very safe to say that the cost would be in the B's, billions of dollars. We believe that the timing would probably be a decade or more to accomplish all this. And the reason for that is there are probably 1 million GPS receivers out there in the military, maybe even more than that. But again, its use is so ubiquitous in weapons, in high-performance platforms, in timing of computer networks, in all those sorts of applications that we take advantage of the GPS signal. We would have to install this filter, again, if it's technically feasible. We would have to thoroughly test it. We might even have to do software modifications to accommodate it. I mean, there's just a whole bevy of questions that are unanswered at this point.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Knapp, would the FCC be the one who addresses the question of who would pay for all this fix?
Well, the first focus is on, do you have a fix that works, and how could it be implemented, and is it viable? And certainly the judgments relative to the military systems would have to be by Department of Defense. Whether there's a way to pay for that and the timing of it, we would have to be working with the parties to see if there is a viable solution.
Mr. Nibia, given the technical complexities and, as you probably can tell, the political sensitivities that are arising, can you ensure this committee that you and your colleagues have the right ability and the right process to effectively analyze and resolve this issue? What's your comfort level? Because this is going to come to a head here sometime.
Thank you, Ranking Member Sanchez. We certainly have an ability within NTIA to work with the federal agencies, including the General's team, who are experts in dealing with GPS issues. There's quite a number of agencies, including experts within the Department of Transportation, NASA, and others. And certainly under the coordinated effort of the XCOM, we have a significant resource there to delve into these issues. It's critical for us. I really can't speak to the political issues in that sense, but that we work through the factual and technical issues. That's what our team can do. We can look at the technical problems that have arisen from this proposal, and we can work through that through real testing, through analysis, through modeling to come up with answers. So I think in that process we have certainly adequate involvement of various federal agencies. We have done a lot of consultation back and forth with the Commission. We have the Interdepartment Radio Advisory Committee, a committee of federal agencies that support us in addition to the XCOM that has provided able input. So I think the ability there is to work through it and to look for what solutions are in fact available in the end.
Thank you. General Shelton, according to the FCC and LightSquared, neither DoD nor GPS raised any concerns during the multi-year process. Will you take this opportunity to fully explain why it took so long for the department and GPS to respond to the significant terrestrial network?
Yes, ma'am. I don't know that it's totally accurate to say that there were no concerns. I think this was a very different business plan that was put forward, and I do believe we were caught a bit off guard. The network proposed originally was a space-based network. Then it was a space-based. Then it was space augmented by ground, and then it became principally ground. Very significant shift. 40,000 transmitters out there is a very different business plan than just a few augmentation transmitters.
And when did you really kind of start sticking your foot in saying, wait a minute, something's wrong here, we need to be involved here? At what point in this 8-year?
About January 2011, January-February timeframe this year is when we really started to get concerned.
And the last question, I know there's plenty of members here who have questions. It's very well attended here. The last question I have for all of you very quickly. Do you all, each individually, feel that your agencies have the ability to work through this and that the interagency communication and listening to each other is happening, or do you think there's breakdowns?
I think we've got good representation.
I would agree with General Shelton. I think it's important to note that the PNT XCOM has really been the focal point for all of our discussion, and we've done that very deliberately because it does include representation from all of the parties. And I think being able to work through that committee enables us to look at all of the interests. And I think one of the interests that we haven't talked about a lot here is our partnership with DOT, and making sure that we have the FAA concerns adequately registered as well, because we're very dependent upon the commercial, and it's very important that we have them included. So I think using the PNT XCOM and then having the close cooperation with NTIA and FCC gives us the ability to have the open dialogue that we need.
Thank you.
I agree. I think I already gave an answer along this line, so I'll just pass on to Tony and put him in the hot seat.
Thank you.
Well, I concur with the other speakers. We do have very strong participation from all of the departments and agencies that are affected, and at very high levels. We've had, assistant secretaries, undersecretaries, deputy secretaries personally working on this issue. One area of caution I would have is that the technical expertise on this mostly resides with General Shelton's folks. We have a lot of people that are users of GPS, but don't necessarily understand how the black box works. So they can tell you how important it is to their operation. But when it gets down to the very detailed technical discussions with LightSquared, we need help from the Air Force.
And I feel very confident in the process that we have in place. What we've tried to do is engage all of the experts in this. We've had many tough problems before, and I know in my career, and at times they've seemed unsolvable. And you work through it, you have a debate, and wherever the chips fall, based on the engineering, is where it will come out.
Thank you, Mr. Knapp, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, General, Madam, Mr. Russo. Mr. Knapp, thank you for your statement that you would not allow anything that would interfere with national security come through with the FCC. I want to go back to this letter. Mr. Nebbia, is that correct? Is that how I say it? I've read this letter and just briefly, but I want to read one of the sentences. Without waiting for the interference issues to be resolved relating to high precision and timing receivers, we would like to move forward to reach resolution of any remaining federal agency concerns with respect to the cellular and personal general navigation receivers. Now, this is from, and it says to contact you if there are any questions, and signed by Lawrence Strickling, who I don't know, but I've been in politics for 14 years. I have never seen an agency advocate so strongly for something like this unless there was pressure from above or a relationship that was not being disclosed. And I guess I would like for you to explain to me why your agency is advocating with the strength and going to the lengths that you are and advocating for this private company when you've got a general sitting there, and you're a graduate of the Naval Academy, as I understand. You've got a general sitting there saying that what these people are doing will affect national security, and yet we've got a federal agency that's advocating on behalf of a private business. Why should the taxpayers be paying to prove these things? Why shouldn't that private company be bearing the burden of the expenses?
Thank you. Certainly in this case, there is an effort on both sides to come to a resolution. I would not characterize NTI's efforts on this part in any way as advocacy of one side or another, but in fact to move the proper people into place to work on the issue. We've had to bring together agencies on our side, get together with the Commission, talk to the GPS Industry Council, work with Light Squared, and so on. In this particular case, the situation we have is that we know that there has been a proposed fix for a certain number of the categories of GPS uses that will not be available for some time. Our purpose here was to try to move the ball forward on the other parts that we felt could be worked on at this point, as opposed to waiting till some later date and getting back into it. So we still have that difficulty ahead of us. The precision uses, the timing uses will still have to be dealt with in the time to come, but it seemed like an opportunity before then for us to work specifically on these issues. The emphasis.
I'm down to about 2 minutes. Can you give me another example of where your agency, the agency that you work for, has advocated on behalf of a company that the Department of Defense has said that this particular issue affects national security? Can you give me another example of where your agency has written a letter with similar language without waiting for these issues to be resolved, that you want the other agencies to move ahead with licensing this? Can you give me an example of another company that y'all have advocated for to that level and strength?
Actually, the letter does not ask for us to move ahead with licensing. It's moving ahead in this process of testing. The NTIA regularly deals with difficult situations and looking at new commercial interests and demands for radio spectrum, and the fact that in some cases we have to be looking at spectrum currently occupied by the military. We are engaged in that at this time. We've been engaged in the past. In this particular case, the fact that it involves one company in this band, I can't say whether that's usual or unusual. We generally are dealing with issues of broad issue and broad policies.
So the letter reads, move forward to reach resolution of any remaining federal agency concerns. I have never seen an agency, a state agency or a federal agency, advocate that strongly on behalf of any private sector company unless somebody's wheel was getting greased. I mean, this is the fact that we're even here having this discussion, I think, is absolutely ridiculous. And Mr. Knapp, I want to thank you for the commitment that the FCC will not allow the licensing of anything that will affect our national security. And General, I want to thank you for the work that you've done on this to protect America. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. And Dr. Fleming also would like to go before the votes. And if that is the case, then what we will do is if these two gentlemen can complete in the time which we need to go, we will conclude the hearing and we will submit the remainder of our questions for the record. Mr. Garamendi.
Perhaps the best way for me to proceed is to not to ask a question, but to rather state what I believe to be the situation. We have a very, very important system in place, the GPS system. It involves all types of activities, all of which have been mentioned here. It is therefore extremely important, in my view, that that system in all of its various ways be protected. And this goes to you, Mr. Knapp. it's not just the national security through the military, it is the economic security and the personal security of Americans and others around the world that are at risk here. And so I would suggest, in every way I can, that you look way beyond just the national security. My questions would go to that area. Secondly, this is going to be a very expensive process of testing. We have a new company entering space occupied by others. It seems to me that that new company ought to bear the full cost of proving that it is not harming others. It appears to me that is not the case. I've not heard anything from any of you that the company is paying for the testing that it seems to me is going to be both extensive and expensive. And I would like all of you to comment in writing about what your cost of testing will be and where in your budgets you have that money, or whether it is best that the new company that wants to occupy this space should pay for the testing. The subsequent question is, if the testing proves that certain things can be done, antennas or filters, who then pays for putting those into effect? And I'd like to have a written response from all of you. Thank you.
Mr. Garamendi, thank you so much for your brief statement. Dr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief also. I came in a little late because I had another HAST meeting that overlapped with this one. What I basically would like to know in a nutshell, just frame, how did we get here on this? I know General Shelton made reference to the fact that the company originally was going to be primarily space-based and not terrestrially based, but it reversed over time. Perhaps engineering science led us to go in that direction. So can you give me a better explanation to encapsulate how did we get here? And we've got engineers, we've got representatives from both sides, so I'm open to anybody who might want to.
I think I can add a little to that.
Sure.
Since 1971, the band below GPS has been allocated for mobile satellite services. We have no problem coexisting with that neighbor. And in the orders you heard about earlier, and you may sort of have missed it in the oral testimony earlier, they talked about adding an ancillary terrestrial component. And that was done for a very specific reason, to give the mobile satellite services operators additional flexibility. And specifically, it talked about a fill-in capability for gaps in coverage inside buildings and in dense urban terrain. That's actually written into the FCC orders on this, and that's what the company at the time applied for, to give them some extra capability to cover places where it might have a problem with coverage. They also talked about in answering complaints about this new authority, they talked about the fact that they would be limited in what they could do by a self-interference. In other words, they were required to have handsets that talked to space and terrestrial system, and therefore the company itself argued that that would then limit what power they could put out and how many stations, because they'd be interfering with their own service. So what we're talking about now is, through a series of orders and amendments and mods and reconsiderations and waivers, over time, that foundation, the assumptions that were made, have changed. And we find ourselves now in a situation that's different than.
Could we have not contemplated this? Was it just something that morphed gradually without anybody really being able to contemplate that down the road all these changes and amendments would eventually get us in trouble?
Well, sir, I think there are pieces of this that there could have been more discussion of along the way. But the big piece was this last piece. This last piece changes it from a space-based system with an ancillary fill-in capability to a primary terrestrial system. And that's this last waiver, and that's what that does.
I see. Well, was it not possible to stay with the original plan and a space-based system, or did the company just find out that that wasn't going to work as planned?
I would largely agree with Mr. Russo, but I would also say that things evolved on both sides with the evolution of GPS and the expanded capabilities over time. This is something that I think your description was fair. It slowly came about. The important thing is, when we all understood that there was a problem there, we put the brakes on the deployment until we get it fixed. So even, I think, with what we've learned here, the number of base stations, if each one were to have caused interference at 22 miles, I think everybody would agree that wouldn't have been acceptable anyway.
Right, sure. Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. And I'll only ask one question for the sake of time and with votes pending. And this will be to you, General Shelton. Thanks for being here. You may have addressed this earlier. Please accept my apology if you have, because I was chairing another subcommittee, so I was not able to get here until a little bit later. But, and this is a little more general of a question. What are your concerns from a command and control perspective should GPS signals be somehow impaired?
Congressman, if you're talking about the broadest sense of command and control, clearly we count on GPS precision as one of our key tenets of command and control. Knowing where our forces are, knowing where the adversary's forces are, very precise locations, that's just fundamental to everything we do in command and control and modern warfare. So without GPS, I think we back up quite a bit.
And even in the U.S., not a global, but just a U.S. Focus on this?
Yes, sir. We train the way we prepared to fight. And if you take us back in training, you take us back in the way we fight. So we have to be as realistic as we can in training, and if you change the training environment to that degree, I think it's a fundamental step backwards.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I want to thank all of our witnesses today. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to the chairman of the FCC providing us with additional answers to our questions. Thank you.